Hi there. How
Could you
you doing?
introduce yourself, please?
Oh, I'm Donna Rizzo. I'm a faculty member in civil and environmental engineering, and um, I guess I'm going to leave it at that.
I, Dr. Rizzo.
Yes,
How
please
can
call me
someone,
Donna.
I looked at some of the research. This is just some of the research things that your name is associated with just in the past couple of years. Greenland ice cores,
Oh, yeah.
soybeans, loneliness, water chemistry, serious illness conversations, psilocybin therapy, barriers to adoption, early childhood mental health, and something that which fascinated me, connected silences.
And all of those are different than honestly what my training is in.
How
And
does
so,
one person be able to contribute to all of those fields and all of those thinkings? What brings you to those things?
uh, first, I think, well, I was trained as a groundwater modeler, groundwater hydrologist. And I had a real passion. My goal when I was young was I wanted everybody on the planet to have access to clean water. And I was very interested in water rights. And that's why I threw myself into that career. But I think that kind of training as a scientist, which I know everybody on our grant has, and I think Julia picks amazing people for that reason. I think they think as from a systems perspective because it's we don't get the luxury of designing per se experimental designs. Like usually the issues and the things that we work on are here's a problem, here's the data you have, what can we do with that? As opposed to not putting down a biologist who works in a lab, but designing an experiment to test a very specific hypothesis. And Julia, despite the fact that she was trained that way and she does lab research, I think her ability to see that there's a different way to tackle problems as opposed to coming up with a hypothesis that you want to test, which is how we're all trained as scientists, the scientific method. But there are different ways to tackle real problems in the world. And if you really care about those real problems, which I think is why the critical zone tried to rebrand themselves critical, humans are a part of this system. I think if you like that kind of research, and in my particular case, I was trained to learn a lot about computational methods and computational tools for solving problems. And so if you get good at that, which is really what I spent a large portion of my career because I got into AI in the 80s and I wanted to know what was going on behind the scenes. I think if you do that and you really listen to people and hear what their problems are, you can use these tools in a lot of different directions. And for my personality, I love learning something new. I caught on very early that there was no shame in telling somebody know nothing about psilocybin therapy. And you are going to be the domain expert. And I think these tools are pretty amazing, and maybe we could figure out a way to have them be applicable. I honestly think I got into the use of using AI in conversations. I mean, we've been doing this for 10, 12 years. It's just recently, people have caught on that it's taken off. I still think the avenues that we've gotten into and the data sets that we've collected because their therapy takes it one step further. Because therapy are very special types of conversations where you agree to do something and the person that's having the conversation with you is trying to help you. That's very different than analyzing other types of conversations. So again, it's I don't know. I just like that whole discovery, science, the discovery of science. And Julia was a kindred spirit. I met her in 2009, early on, before we even got involved in writing grants, and you could tell that she thinks the same way. You know. Anyway,
So one of the things that you look at is patterns, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm curious to hear more about your thoughts about AI and how people are reflecting on that. But there was one paper that really, you worked a lot of with palliative care researchers, which is such an important for people on the outside who don't work in that field. It always feels so heartbreaking or sad, but I know there's a level of happiness and
joy.
joy that can come in that kind of work. And the thing that caught my attention looking at some of your work was this connected silences
Yeah,
that goes on and just sitting quietly with someone. What did you learn
yeah.
about that kind of behavior working with those teams?
Well, I'll preface this with my meeting, and I don't know if anything is just luck. Maybe, maybe things are fated. But yeah, I had been like the primary care person by default for three people over the age of 90 and was struggling with how to deal with a healthcare system, and all three of them wanted something very different. My mom talked about death all through our childhood. We would just accepted that we are all going to die. And so why not plan for the inevitable, right? That's just, but like her sister, who I ended up, that was older than her, did not believe she was ever going to die and wanted to live for as long as possible. And so what people want at the end of their life is very different, and trying to honor that in a healthcare system that all three of these people were extremely intelligent, but watching what happens to you when you get into your 90s and not being able to understand even things that are being said to you or options that are being said to you, and the frustration and not being able to use devices or even, schedule necessary appointments and things like that. And that's all going to happen to all of us. I just met Bob Gramling, who was a palliative care specialist at that time, and I realized the joy that he got in having conversations with people and helping them through sometimes the most scary moment in your life is coming to grips with the fact that you're going to die, even if we all know we're going to. It's one of the scariest conversations that people will have. And the fact that there were people that were trained to help you ease that fear, given that it's inevitable, to me was fascinating. And I viewed it as very similar to my goals as a teacher. They're very unique conversations when you have a conversation with a student who wants a degree or wants to learn. It's not the same as just having a natural conversation where it can go anywhere or it can be entertaining. There are very specific things that have to be communicated, and you have to deeply listen to whether the person is hearing what you think you're saying. And so it's such a compacted, important, sometimes hour conversation, where very rarely do we have conversations that that amount of critical information needs to be exchanged in a relatively short period of time. Just to have these things recorded and to have people that you knew had very specific goals, but they knew that they could derail when they realized someone's telling you right now what they value in life and how they want to die, and to honor that and to have people that truly listen. That's why the connectional silence is so important. It's not just I'm being quiet. It's I'm really listening to what you're saying and trying to understand your point of view, even if I don't agree with it. And that's what you have to do with, I think that's what you have to do with teaching. I don't know, the first test I ever gave in my hydraulics class, I told my husband when I was grading it, thank God it was only 2 weeks into the semester, I'm the worst teacher in the world. I really believe that. And it changed the whole way I taught in a classroom. Like I'll ask tons of questions, and sometimes they're, rhetoric even, but it's like I want you to communicate and feel free to communicate the important things in life. My mom claims it's because my grandmother was Czechoslovakian and she hated, I guess I didn't know this about people from Czechoslovakia, but they do not like, they think frivolous greetings are meaningless. Like it's insulting to say, good morning, how are you? And you say, I'm fine, thank you, even if you're not, you know what I mean? To have that kind of exchange, like why go through it? So my grandmother from a very early age, when she wanted to know exactly how you were in that moment. And unfortunately, when people ask me how I am, I often tell them, and people accuse me of sharing too much. And I'd be like, but I learned really early that I just find conversations more fun, even if they're sad, if people are if people are discussing something that's really important to them in life. To me, that's what we should do as humans, regardless of whether we're scientists or not. But right? Anyway, so it's been fascinating to explore those conversations using AI because we've made real interesting advances in these tools. And nobody, I don't think, thought it was going to be possible. But now look at what you can do with ChatGPT and things like that. You can identify fear. You can automate the process of identifying fear in a conversation, very emotional moments. And we just first started by, okay, let's take the conversation so that humans can look at those moments. But we basically were able to identify really salient moments in conversations and hand them back to the collaborators that I work with there. And they actually do a much better job of training people to have these conversations. Because quite often, doctors in particular, they're trained to keep you alive. They don't really want to have a conversation with you about death or the fact that, they might be failing or can't save you. And so these conversations were really difficult for the people that are trying to be trained sometimes. Anyway,
That touches a bit on the patterns part of looking at data and finding the patterns within the things that have changed. I really want to talk about that, but you just mentioned AI a few times. That's the big hot ticket
yeah,
these
yeah.
days. Have you sat down with some of these models and challenged them in your own way? As someone who thinks about it has been part of your sort of world for a couple of decades now. Like you sit down with the new Chat GPT O, like, okay, what have you got, model? Let's find out. Is that something that you do on your weekends, or do you actually get part of your work?
We do it as part of the work. I actually have a class, an AI class that I love because it's basically the students are expected to learn I try to pick 9 completely different types of AI algorithms just so they will walk away from the class realizing that these tools are as different as if you're familiar with statistics, all the statistical tools. You would never use this one to do this thing. And the reason that these generative algorithms are so good is because they're anticipating the next, you know, 7 words out of what, you're going to say. That's why they're able to be fool you, which is what the original Turing machine test for AI was, and I'd say we've surpassed that. I personally never agreed with that as a definition of intelligence, but that's what in computer science was defined as the you know intelligence. So we can go into a whole conversation on consciousness and time and why I love studying temporal. I mean, to me, conversations are temporal stories. And to me, that's time series data, which is all the environmental data that we collect on these grants. That's just time series data. And so it's looking. I spent my first 30 years looking for interesting moments in environmental sensor data for people, and they sometimes would have to train me as to what an important moment looked like. But now we're doing it with conversations. Yeah, it's
It's
it's fun.
amazing. So in your life, when you're looking at something, do you automatically see patterns in everything? At the grocery
I
store, when you're driving, you're looking at the stoplights changing and you're waiting in traffic and things like that. Is it just endemic to your existence?
I think it's endemic to all of our existences. If you actually read papers on how, I mean, that's what I start my AI class with. Got fascinated by papers early on in vision and trying to make a computer be able to see. And you think how difficult that is. And think how quickly a baby goes from just seeing nothing. I mean, not nothing. There's light and colors and sensors, and their little brains are on overload to, all of a sudden being able to distinguish dad from the door. That's phenomenal, and they don't have speech yet. And that part of your brain is obviously one of the first that's really starting to be developed. And those patterns, to me, and I don't want to get into the argument about what is intelligence, and people know it when they see it, but to me, that's a form of intelligence that is putting a whole slew of patterns that can imagine coming into a world and right, you have no idea what's happening to you. And to get that part of your brain trained up. In fact, he was a speaker here at one of our graduations, but it was a paper out of the University of Wisconsin that made me so excited about this field. And it's why I actually went into, changed my career and wanted to go into engineering. The researchers there had figured, well, if you're, you know, they don't know what age it is, you're an expert in vision, but it's pretty early on, and your brain has already learned to map those things. And there was a rock climber, Eric Weinmeier, who he became famous for being the first person to climb Mount Everest blind, but he had lost his eyesight early on. I want to say like when he was 11 or 12. And so your brain is already, you're an expert in vision by that time. And so they thought, well, the brain has already been mapped to learn those patterns. The signals are just no longer going in. So they put they put a camera strap to his head that just took black and white images, pixels, and they turned each one of the grayscale colors of the pixels into a pressure on a tiny little plate that just mimicked it. And they put the plate on his tongue because your tongue's extremely sensitive to pressure. And within a couple of hours, he had spatial awareness again. He was able to actually get up and see that a door was open. I mean, it wasn't great, but you know what I mean? The fact that that gets mapped and all the things that you've learned in your lifetime get mapped via pattern because no one has told you how to see when you're young. You know, that difference between, to me, supervised learning, a whole slew of beautiful algorithms for supervised learning, but I fell more in love with the things that are called unsupervised learning. The thing that just clusters things into groups and you give them names later on, which is how I believe the majority of how we learn, goes, you know?
As part of the big data cluster, you're handed, here's a whole bunch of time series data from streams and soil chemistry and stuff of
Yep.
that. Help us figure out what we're looking at. Is that rewarding? Is it fun? Is it
Oh my God, it's the best part of my job. It's the best part of this grant. And I know I know Julia perhaps wanted me to be a little bit more involved with the data management and stuff like that, and I quickly gave up my salary and got Byung on board so that I didn't have to do that. And I told her that the thing I love is working with the graduate students. Like she has one of her students in my class is amazing right now. It's a geostatistics class. The whole thing is again about patterns, and in my opinion, we have now when it comes to conversations and speech, yeah, okay, I understand we have too much data perhaps because we collect it from all these devices, even you not knowing it. Um, but in the environmental world, given the space that we have to cover and the differences that could occur in Vermont versus just New Hampshire, because of all that, we'll never have too much data. So to me, the more data you can collect remotely at different scales on the ground, we're going to need to put all of that together to solve some of the critical problems that are facing us when it comes to environmental data. And to me, it's just a really fun time to be in this, world and to train future scientists to do this is so satisfying. To take someone who's terrified of statistics or terrified of computing and say, okay, no longer can you just collect data in the field? It used to be that you could do that and be a faculty member. Now you have to be somehow data savvy in a way, or you're not going to be able to. And if you're the domain expert, you should be the one analyzing your own data. So to give people those tools so that they can do that and to have them feel that sense of accomplishment and success. I mean, I worked for 7 or 8 years, had my own business in environmental consult. We actually cleaned up groundwater contaminated sites, made a lot of money. But the reason I decided to come back and take a huge salary cut into academia was because maybe by doing a class and I have 31 students, graduate students in the class this year, you have no idea what those 31 students will all go off and do. So maybe I'm making a bigger impact that way by, letting them become the experts in these tools because they change so fast. There's no way a single human can even keep up with everything. 3 months later, the algorithm I'm using is now old, which is, you know, anyway, it's again, it's an I give credit to Julia because to put together this complex grant and to, have all these pieces come together and like herding faculty is oof, worse than cats, So,
A last question for you this morning, and thank you for taking some time on a Friday to talk. How do you find hope every day in humanity and for the future of the world?
honestly, that's one of the reasons I love teaching. I think being around students keeps you young because you do get a little bit more despondent or, oh my God, we've passed especially those of us who have cared about climate change for so long and, feeling maybe we've surpassed that threshold. It's just to see young people that so badly want to change the world in a positive way. It gives you a lot of hope for the future. We have some pretty amazing young people coming up that are their hearts are in the right place and gives you hope for humanity given what sometimes we see unfortunately advertised on the news. And so yeah, anyway.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you so much for taking some time today, and we'll say goodbye after the recording.
Okay.